Hi there. I'm Jean Troy with Daza Development,
I'm Jessica Whitmore, also with Dazzle Development.
and together we are J Squared. Ah, yes. Busy first 3 months of the year. I'm sure you all are feeling that too. This particular session knows it's going to be a two-parter, and it's going to be on boards and the composition of boards and how do you get board members and the term and everything. Hopefully, we can answer whatever questions you may have on board information. It's always a challenge, but we're going to try to keep it basic. So for this one, we're going to assume a couple things, and one of which is that you all have your bylaws, you all are registered with the state that you live in, you all are compliant in both state and federal avenues, I guess we could call that, Jess.
Yeah, I would say requirements, but yep, both ways.
That's the word. So when you put together a board, like what do you look for? What should you look for? I have my ideas. I'm sure Jessica has her ideas. So let's kind of go with her first.
Oh, you want to go with me first? Sure. I was just kind of writing some of them down. I think a couple things you have to think about for your board. It's not just about a group of friends all coming together. It's not just about a family coming together. Those can be parts of it, but really for your board, you want to have somebody who's passionate about what your organization is doing and has that internal drive for success. But you also want somebody who has some sort of expertise that can be brought into that. And that might be whatever their background is, if they have a communication background, marketing background, I don't know if you're a
Fun,
health
fun.
related, yeah, whatever it might be, but also somebody who is able to network within your community. So, one of the things that makes me cringe when we talk to different organizations and different boards or, different executive directors, and they're like, well, I talked to this person, they want to be on our board, but they don't want to do any fundraising. They'll do anything except for fundraising. And as a board, from my perspective, and Jane, I know you'll add in this, that you're laying out the strategy for the organization, and you're also raising money. So those are the two most. I have heard a third role of a board.
We're not going
Um,
to go yet.
we'll cover that another time. But yeah, those are the two most important things. And then how does that come together? So that would be my basic summary.
And that's a really good summary. I know as you get started, the inclination is to have family members and friends, and maybe for a bit of time to get some momentum under you, that is certainly acceptable. It's not ideal. Ideally, you want people who are skilled in the legal world that can review contracts, those who have marketing background, financial backgrounds, communication backgrounds, dare I say it, fundraising, because that is part and parcel of it. So you build the board according to the needs of the organization is really how it works. You can have multiple bankers, multiple industries representative. There's no thing that says, oh, you only have one banker and one realtor and things like that. That's not there. But the other question that comes up a lot is, well, how big a board should I have? Well, you know, that's what does your bylaws say? If your bylaws say no more than nine, and by the way, it should be an odd number because then you avoid ties. Um, it depends on what your bylaw says. A board of 15 or 20, that is just unwieldy because then you've got 15 to 20 different schedules you have to figure out for board meetings and committee. Keep it manageable. And that might mean in the beginning five. That's pretty manageable. It might mean as you get a little bit older as an organization and bigger, it might.
Established.
Thank you. Yes,
Established.
established. As the more you get established, take that word old out. You may have 7 to 9 to 11, but really you don't want to get into the teens and higher for board numbers. That's just makes my head spin thinking of that. The other thing is, boards have, as Jessica mentioned, two of them, roles and responsibilities. It isn't just giving money and getting money. That is the classic, and there is a third one, but we're not going to go with that yet. I mean, that is the two most important roles. Yes, But you've got other fiduciary responsibilities. You've got committee responsibilities. How are you going to raise money for the organization? Is it through grants? Which, yes, it's a one avenue, but not all avenues. It's not the end all be all. So you have to come up with a plan, and your board members will help you do that. But they need to have expectations listed from you, the organization, to them, the board members. And I little side note here, when organizations apply for grants, it is expected that every board member contributes financially to the organization in a way that is impactful to that board member. Don't tell them how much. Everybody's financial situation is different, but everybody needs to do that because those are asked on board applications, to which Jessica can attest to because that's her huge
The,
role in Gaza.
the other thing that's important, along with that for applications or sponsorships or anything that you're kind of putting out for funding is people want to know, funders want to know who is on your board. And that will also come down to, for grant applications, submitting a board list that doesn't just have here's the board, the name of the person on the board and their role, but also here's where they're employed, or here's the industry they're retired from, or here's where they used to work, along with their contact information. And I know some board members are like, well, I don't want that all out there. It's not public facing for everybody to get into. It's for those funding requests and those interactions. And what it speaks to is then the decision makers can go, oh, I see they have a representative from XYZ Corporation. We know them really well. If I trust it, it establishes a level of trust and understanding.
Well, and it lets, I think, in addition to that, I think it lets the funder know you are established in the community and you have these different people to draw from, companies that they're affiliated with, and it's not all dependent on grants. So they want to see the board and who they are and where they are. And to me, that's a critical component for every part of an organization, not just grants, but everything. It's
Mhm.
that's just big.
And one of the things too about the perfect number of board members, I'm glad you mentioned don't have an even number because that was one of the things I wrote down. You know, when it comes to voting, groupthink can happen a lot in a board situation where somebody doesn't want to be the opposing voice but has something to say, and you don't want to be caught in that tie even type of thing.
Right.
Make your voice known, make your concerns known, because I mean you're leading an organization. That's your responsibility. But also, Jean, what are your thoughts on the role of the executive director on the board, as well as if you have a founder that's on the board? Like I know there we've seen multiple ways that this is done, but best practices on those?
Eh, best practices are so different because best practices, the organizations are different. To me, an executive director reports to the board. So the board is their employer. They are an employee of that board. I don't think, me, does not think an executive director should be on the board. They can lead the meetings, they can speak to what the organization does, provide the financials, blah, 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 all that stuff. But as a voting board member, absolutely not. To me, that's a conflict of interest. And you ought not to have that. Founders, it's a little bit more touchy. I read an article the other day, and I promise I will find it and send it to you, Jess. I read an article the other day that said when organizations are founded, like say I start one, it's not my organization. I didn't find it. I this, I that, my this, my that. It's not that. We started this so that we can help the community. So you have to remember a founder is very important to the organization. But I think after the organization is up and running, that the founder, one, should not be on the board. They can be an ex officio because you may have people board members who could disagree with a founder's thought or process and hesitate to say it because they're on the board. I'm of the opinion a board is you need to have everybody who's open to conversation, open to discussion, open to disagreement. You don't want yes people on the board because Heaven knows I'm certainly not a yes person. So you want to,
That's how you end up with groupthink.
well, right. And we've seen it both ways. We've seen it where clients, the founder is so behind the organization that everybody gives in to them. No, that does the organization no good if nobody's afraid. If everybody's afraid to say, I disagree, then don't have a board, in my viewpoint. So I think, it's a wire that you walk on. It's a little, you have to be careful, but eventually everybody does come to the point and realize that this is for the betterment of the organization. The founder can be an ex officio as well, and they still have input, but they don't vote. And I think that needs to be at some point in time, the bylaws would need to be amended to reflect that. People write bylaws and they think, oh, this is it, it's cut in stone, it's the tablets, we can't do anything with it. No, you can amend bylaws. You can
Yeah,
amend.
you have a process in place in your bylaws to
Right,
amend to your bylaws.
right, which kind of sounds
I know, right?
odd when you say that. But I don't like I don't like it. I don't subscribe that you have to have the founder on the board and you have to have the executive director, particularly the executive director. In the beginning, maybe yes, until you're established a 3 or 4 or 5 year old organization. Once you hit that 5 year mark, you should be able to go without having the ED and having the founder on it.
And I have seen it on board lists where those phrases
Ex officio.
thank you,
Yeah,
and also non-voting member
right.
are put behind the names to signify the presence in
Correct.
the meetings, but also the yeah that they're identified for their specific role.
And they will forever be connected to the organization, but they don't have a voting power behind that. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
you have to remember that the board may vote on things the ED or the founder doesn't like, but that's part and parcel of growing as an organization. The other thing,
If,
oh,
oh, we always like tag teaming. Like we're all like, I was gonna say a great movie that illustrates the impact of groupthink. It's an old black and white movie. It's 12 Angry Men. It's literally, I had to watch it in grad school. It's one setting about 12 jurors and this whole thing of swirling around and who's the opposing voice and where does that all lead for conversation. So,
actually, we did that in high school.
did you? I haven't watched it for a long time, but that's a
Right.
great movie.
The other thing I wanted to point out too, we wanted to note is that on nonprofit boards, generally, with minor exceptions, it's all volunteer. They don't get paid. Because they have an interest in the mission. It might be that their company requires them to be involved in the community. Gee, what a horrible thing for a company to want. But it's generally not paid. Your corporate boards, i.e., Exxon, pharmaceuticals, and things like that, yeah, they get paid. But NPO boards generally not. So if you have somebody who says to you, I would love to be on the board, but I need to get paid. No, you really don't want to be on the board.
And you want to make sure somebody has the time for it.
Correct.
Because in that volunteer role, and I've heard this in many different ways, executive directors are paid to run the daily operation, and they're relying on a board who may see it more as a hobby. So make sure that you have somebody that is going to be able to dedicate that time and be present when you need them to be present.
And as you're doing your research, also make sure that you follow whatever state you're living in, the requirements for board memberships. Every state is different. Like the age comes into play.
Yes.
What is the age of board member? The youngest that a board.
Right, because some states allow junior board members where somebody under 18 can start to come on a board, not necessarily, and every state's different, with a voting as a voting member, but to learn and understand how a board operates. Sometimes they give that outside voice into the board. Obviously, if you're talking about high level executive session type stuff, that you can decide if they're in that or not.
Depends on the kind of organization. If you're a
Yes.
service organization and you're providing clinical services, no, you don't want someone under the age of 18 listening on
Yep.
that.
But it's also important if, say, I don't know, your family started a foundation and you've expanded from that original founder family member to bring in other board members, but you want a family presence somehow leading into the next generation. You bring in that junior board member to start, depending on your state, because your state also has requirements on how many family members can be present on a board, and things like that. All guidelines to keep the integrity of nonprofits.
I mean, I've heard of organizations who have it written into their charter that there has to be a family member. If it's a family organization, there must be a family member at the head of the organization, even during, times where the current founder, it's written in that, for example, that you need to have a family member always at the head of the organization. Now that begs the question, though, of okay, you have to have a family member there, but what happens if the family member is not interested in
Well,
being?
that's what I'm going to say. If you're interested or not interested, I mean, you hear that all the time with family businesses
Right.
that run two, three generations, and the fourth generation, they're not interested. They want to go off on something else. And so it's sold to somebody else. And yes, you have to think about that. Like, does the family member want to be involved? Is there a path to start making sure that they're involved, from a younger age, so that it's not all of a sudden, oh, congratulations, you're now on the board and you're required to do X, Y, and Z. Like it takes some
It takes some thinking.
logistical background,
Yeah.
I
And
think.
and when you're talking about boards and responsibilities, truly onboarding a board member is critical so that they understand how the organization works, where the money comes from, how many board members are on. They see the bylaw. Well, they should get a copy of the bylaws, and they understand that. So bring on a board member as if you're bringing on an employee in a company. You have to do the same thing and give them some grace and understanding all this because they may ask questions and like, okay, but I already told you this. Yeah, well, people forget. So, let's try to remember
Well,
that. But
and when they're coming in, they might be coming in as an outsider. So they're going to look at things completely different than the board members who have maybe been embedded for multiple terms, whatever those term limits are, on, off, however long they are. So when you're bringing in a board member, it's not just to get another vote. Oh, I know so and so is going to vote yes with me on everything. It's you're bringing in another voice. But you can have job descriptions for boards. You can have and I'm sure you know the better terminology for all of it, but there's also sheets where you can look at where your current board is
oh,
and look
board
at
audit,
what,
a board
yes,
audit.
thank you. And what's missing and what gaps do you need to fill in? And that takes some strategy as well. And that's the perfect example of why the board is working for the overall organization, not, not the
And
little.
to that point on strategy, board members, you really need to have a strategic long range plan. And so board members are critical to that because they will get a feel for the vision of the organization, 3, 5 year plan, and have input into that. And again, it's perfectly okay. I welcome when I do planning sessions, discussions and disagreements, because that lets me see into their heads and what they're thinking. You can't have a planning session with board members and the board members don't say anything because I'll stop it right then and there until somebody says something because you can't, you have to have that give and take. So when you do a board audit and that shows, as Jessica had mentioned, your strengths and weaknesses, if that really should be done probably every year so you can see if you're stagnant or we might need a little more push in this particular field or category or industry. So everything that is done to benefit the organization. And again, people may not like that. I mean, I did a planning session once with a board where a board member sat like this the whole time. Well, first of all, that's so defensive. And
Mhm.
me being who I am, I'm like, do you have a problem with what I'm saying? Because he didn't like that. He said, well, I'm not here to give money. I'm here to get employees.
Mm.
Right out and said that. And I said, mm-mm. You're here to support the organization, not your organization be supported by this. So you have to understand. And when you interview potential board members, ask them why they want to be on the board. And if it's about what I want for the business I represent, then you don't want them on the board. You want people who will help you move your organization, believe in the mission, and raise money as well as give money.
Mhm.
4 critical parts that are needed. I was shocked actually when this person said that.
Wow.
I was like, well, yeah, that's not going to work. You know, so The other question that comes up is where do you find board members? I feel
Mm.
like it's a search. Where do we find board members? So I am part of a local up here, Leadership Harrisburg area. It's a leadership class of 2006. Those are the up and coming, those classes, your leadership classes, other organizations that have abilities to get their employees out in the public. Those are great sources of potential leaders and potential board members. Don't hesitate to reach out to those leadership organizations and say, look, this is what I need. If you know somebody that's been through that organization as a leadership student, you probably can get them to write a blurb about your organization. So your leadership classes, people in the community, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is an awesome, I think it's great. You can do a job description and list it for free. At least that's the way it was recently, about your needs for a board member, because it's a job. It's just not a paid job. It's a job. If you put that description out, then you're drawing from a huge pool. Because do you really want everybody just from your area? And this is everybody knows the same people and you don't grow? Or do you want a bigger impact and a bigger reach by having people from all over who say, I don't have this in my backyard, but I'd really like to be part of it? So I've often recommended to LinkedIn, and I know Jessica has too, that you put your stuff out that way. And
Mhm.
again, word of mouth, but you have to interview board members. You can't just say, oh, good, come on board. No, no.
There you go. Here's your pass.
Yeah.
Um, I
Yeah.
I will add, I've often heard if you want something done, find a busy person
Yes.
because busy people know how to get things done. That being said, every interaction you have, you're out at a social event, you're out at a networking event, I don't know, you're out doing whatever.
Haircut.
You can have conversations
Yeah.
and things like that, and kind of in those conversations, kind of do a pre-screening of, see if somebody's interested or if they know somebody who's recommended
Right.
or, things like that. One of the questions I do have, and I've seen this multiple times, especially with people who are very well established in nonprofits and use their retirement years to serve on multiple boards. And I've seen it done well. I've seen it not done well. So, what are your thoughts on serving on multiple boards?
It's hard to serve more than one master, shall we say. However, I have seen that. I mean, I know people who sit on six boards. Well, that's six different organizations you are supposed to give to. So if you're financially able to do that, more power to you. But I find sitting on more than three boards,
Hmm.
three is max to
Kind of
do.
like having three kids. Don't go more than three kids.
Well,
No, I'm kidding.
exactly. Well, because you've got three different sets of meetings, three different sets of committee meetings, three different sets of however many events that they have. You've got three different sets of everything an organization does. When I was on boards, and right now I'm in a different position, so conflict of interest for me with the clients that we have. Um, I made it two. That's
Mm.
all I could do was just two, because one, people have a life. Let's not forget that. Work-life balance. We all try to strive for that, but you can't parcel yourself out so much that you're not doing any organization any good. So you and only you know your capacity to give time, to give talent, to give treasure. Only you can answer that question. But any more than three, and I think you're really
And
splintering.
looking back, as you mentioned that, looking back, I think mine at one point I was on two different boards as well, as my children were involved in different
Right.
different things, and
I mean, I was on
get
a
out of
statewide
interest out of
board.
those.
If you're on a statewide board, that takes up an incredible amount of time. So if you're on a statewide board and you want to get involved in a local board, one of them is going to have to go.
Well, and you mentioned also about committees, and I think what some people forget is I'm on the board. That's all I need to be on, but the board. Not necessarily the small ones of the organizations that are starting up and taking baby steps forward, but the more established boards, you're going to have multiple committees.
Mhm.
And you may be on a committee where it meets so many times and this committee meets so many times. Then you have your overall board and you're having the emails go through of the agendas and the minutes and all the things that are documented, um, which is all important as well as bringing structure, but there is that committee element
Yeah. So
as
again,
well.
you have to factor that into your time. As Jessica mentioned, do you have kids that are growing up? Do you have to play sports, mom or dad, and take them to different places? And what about your job responsibilities? Are there internal committees you have to be there that could conflict with, the committees for the nonprofit? I talked to just a lovely person, and I wanted him so badly to be on a committee for something, and he said, I can't.
Yeah.
Send us information on sponsorships and things like that. Great, be happy to do that. And I know when his time frees up, which is probably in a year from now, I'll be able to have him come on board to some organizations I know could use his enthusiasm, his passion, and his desire to do good. He just can't do it. And so kudos to him for recognizing that. Not because people will say, "Oh, sure, I can do that," and then they don't. And the
Yep.
organization suffers, the board suffers. In your bylaws, it ought to, key phrase, ought to list how many meetings a board member can miss.
Yes.
Your
Yes.
bylaws are your teeth to the organization. It's like,
The bylaws become the bad guy,
yes,
right? Like you don't want to be the one saying, "Oh, so and so, you haven't reported to our meetings. I have to tell you you can't
right,
be on the board anymore."
right.
The bylaws become the standard. So I can say, "Jean, I really appreciate everything you've done for this board, but our bylaws state you need to be at 10 million meetings and you've only been at 9." So and the bylaws will have that exit strategy of how to vote out somebody not doing, holding up to their responsibilities or things like that. The bylaws, and I know even when I was running a homeschool nonprofit, there was many times where we would say back to the different members, we can't do that because our bylaws indicate. So it's not the person who is taking on that mean role, it's the bylaws for the integrity and the accountability and transparency
Well,
of
and
the
for the
nonprofit.
overall benefit of the organization, because the organization is the board that it's comprised of. And if you're lucky enough to have employees and volunteers and all that, the board helps oversee every single facet of that organization. So it isn't just, I'm going to have my name down on the side of a piece of paper on the letterhead. It's way more than that. So as you establish your boards, you need to think what you want to accomplish with that board
Mhm.
and then choose accordingly for that board.
And
So,
if you're just a regular person enjoying their cup of coffee in the morning and thinking, I want to get more involved at a community level, you can find the nonprofits, look at what the nonprofits are in your communities, look at where you want to get involved, what's in your passion, and also look at what your employer offers for like volunteer days to start getting involved there. I have friends who their benefit packages at work allow them to give like 40 hours of volunteer time paid by the company. There's paperwork involved, but you can start to look if you're on the other side thinking, I want to become a board member. I don't know how to get into any of it. Do it on the flip side. And you know what I mean? Start to look to see what's available and start to reach out.
yeah, I mean, that's a really good point to make because companies do pay. The United Way has United Way Day of Caring, where the participants in the United Way organizations and the companies that support get a paid day to go help paint or mulch or
Mhm.
whatever needs to be done. So there are ways to get involved. It requires some research on your part. And if you're really interested in an organization and you have a mission that you believe in, research that mission in your area and
Mhm.
see what's available. Everybody wants to help puppies and dogs and animals and things like that. And then there's homelessness, and then there's food insecurity. I mean, there's any
So
number of
many
ways to
great.
get
Yeah.
involved. There's
Yep.
any number of ways. So
And if they don't have an opening on the board, most nonprofits have some sort of volunteer program where and most nonprofits are looking for board members. It's if it's not a board opening for today, it's a board opening for when terms
And
expire.
and actually, you bring up a good point. If you're going to volunteer, what an inside opportunity for you to see how an organization functions. And that will tell you if you really want to get involved with this organization. Because when you're a volunteer, you see how it works. You see
Mhm.
the processes. You see if it's a food bank. You see how the food comes in and how it goes out and how you do this and do that. So it really gives you that chance to learn about the organization before you go on the board.
And about the structure, because a lot of people think corporate organization structure will just transfer over to nonprofit, nonprofit will just transfer over to corporate. There are many similarities. There are ways that you can tie things back and forth. If you have experience in one, you can in the other, but the structures can be so very different. And getting into even the internal cultures
Yeah.
and things like that. So it
I'm
is a
sure it's
great
a great fit.
opportunity
It's a great,
to learn.
so to sum it up, roles and responsibilities, figure out what you want them to do and what they need to do. Who should be on it? That's entirely up to you. Need to decide as an organization the categories, industries, whatever you need to have on it. Where do you find them? Anywhere and everywhere, but look to your leadership organizations. How many? Please, no more than 15. That's all I'm going to say. No more than 15, but no even numbers. Bylaws, refer to your bylaws, because before you look for board members, your bylaws will have explained in detail what you need from a board member, how often, and things like that. Again, as Jessica said, that is the backbone of the organization. Remember that volunteers are not paid, not paid. And then check with your state to find out the requirements if there's ages to be a board member and things like that, because you do want to be compliant.
Mhm.
Keep in mind the nature of what your organization does. I mean, if you're a animal rescue, okay, probably 16 would be fine.
Yeah.
And as a family, you can come volunteer and, help with that. But you have to think
Yeah, if you have more specialized, like your,
client sensitive information, you have to be
yes,
careful with that.
yeah, yeah.
So that's today's part one. Part two, which I think is coming up in a few weeks that we'll be doing, is on succession planning on board members, the tenure and how long should it be, and a little more in-depth dive on that. But as always, reach out to Dazzle Development. We'd love to have a conversation if you find yourself in need of anything that we do, or just have a technical question for us. Jessica and I would be happy to answer them. So
Yeah, that's the best way. We're always available for
yeah,
having a conversation
so,
of, any of the topics that we discuss
yeah.
to
So.
provide more insight.
So happy spring, everybody, depending where you are in the planet here. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a good weekend, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.